In 2011, a small team of engineers at SpaceX sat around a whiteboard in Hawthorne, California. They were trying to design an engine that had never been built before, an engine that ran on methane, operated at pressures that would melt steel, and used a cycle that existed only in textbooks. Their boss told them it was impossible. Their competitors told them it was a waste of time. But they did it anyway. This is the story of the Raptor engine. 7 facts that no textbook covers and the engineering behind each one. In the 1960s, Soviet and American engineers dreamed of the full-flow staged combustion cycle. They drew diagrams, they ran calculations, they published papers. The Soviet RD-270 was the pioneer, built for a Mars-bound rocket called the UR-700, but it never solved its combustion instability issues, and Glushko's hypergolic propellant made it an environmental tragedy waiting to happen. The concept sat in textbooks for 50 years, a beautiful idea that was too difficult to build. The problem was complexity. You needed 2 preburners, one fuel-rich, one oxidizer-rich. You needed turbopumps that could handle extreme temperatures. You needed seals that could hold against thousands of psi. But the real problem was deeper. In the full-flow cycle, almost all of the fuel is first burned with a tiny bit of oxidizer in the fuel preburner to generate hot gas. Then, all that gas mass goes through the turbines to drive the turbopumps. The same process happens with the oxidizer. Here is the nightmare. To test the preburner, you need both the fuel and oxidizer pumps to feed it. But to drive the turbopumps, you need the output of both preburners. To test the combustion chamber, you need the turbopumps and the preburners. Individual testing of each subsystem is almost impossible unless you have a test stand capable of supplying extremely high-pressure liquid and hot gaseous of both the fuel and oxidizer at the same time. Enter the famous Stennis Space Center and its critical E2 test stand. In late 2013, SpaceX engineers arrived at Stennis Space Center to help upgrade its unique E2 test stand, enabling it to supply liquid and hot gaseous methane. On April 21, 2014, the upgraded test stand was officially inaugurated. A full test program of each individual subsystem was tested and validated. Since the final thrust level of the Raptor had not been settled, it was decided that the first integrated test engine would be a 1MN subscale engine. This was the critical insight. The full-flow cycle is very helpful in that sense. Once you prove the cycle works at subscale, you can scale it up with relative ease. The team developed specialized software to compute just the mixing process in detail while adding approximations for the rest of the flow. This still allowed for very high-fidelity simulations to be carried with reasonable computing resources. But this modeling breakthrough still required validation with real results first, which would be realized by the demonstrator engine. On August 8, 2016, the first integrated Raptor demonstrator left its Hawthorne base for SpaceX's very own Raptor test stand in its McGregor facility. Then came the milestone. On September 26 at around 3 a.m. UTC, the first ignition test of the demonstrator was performed, a burp test, a short firing that tests the ignition phase, usually without the engine reaching full power. But this first test was more than just a burp test. Elon Musk showed a video at the IAC forum in Guadalajara, the Raptor igniting and firing for approximately 9 seconds before shutting down. The first full-flow staged combustion engine in 50 years, and it worked. The textbooks did not cover this because the textbooks were written before anyone had done it. Now, the next problem. At 350 bar chamber pressure, the combustion temperature inside Raptor reaches 3,500 Kelvin. That is hotter than the surface of most stars. Let me put this in perspective. The BE-4 engine used by Blue Origin runs at about 135 bar. The Merlin 1D, which powered Falcon 9 to orbit for years, ran at 97 bar. Raptor runs at more than 3 times the pressure of the engine that put most of SpaceX's customers into orbit. The previous record holder for chamber pressure, the RD-170 derivative RD-191, was 25.74 megapascals, and Raptor exceeds 30 megapascals. Why does chamber pressure matter? Because pressure equals performance. Higher chamber pressure means you can extract more energy from each kilogram of propellant. It means higher exhaust velocity. It means better specific impulse. But higher pressure also means higher temperatures. And higher temperatures mean you need better cooling, better materials, and better manufacturing. The team had to build an engine that could survive conditions that would melt steel. Traditional rocket engines used machined cooling channels, grooves cut into the metal walls, covered with a separate sheet. But machining had limits. You could only make straight channels. You could not optimize the flow. So SpaceX tried something else. They started printing the cooling channels. Using selective laser melting and binder jetting, they print complex metal parts in a single piece. The injector plate is printed with its cooling channels already inside. The turbopump housing, which used to require many welded components, is now printed as a single structure from an Inconel 718 blend. The nozzle throat is built with a nickel-chromium alloy and cooling lattices printed layer by layer. The results are dramatic. A recent analysis found that regenerative cooling, flowing cold propellant through channels in the engine walls before it reaches the injectors, reduces nozzle wall temperatures by 80 to 95% at different sections. The best design achieved 89% cooling at the throat section, where the heat flux is highest. Why does this matter? Because 3D printing allows cooling channels that would be impossible to machine. Complex geometries, internal lattices, optimized flow paths. The textbooks did not cover this because the textbooks assume you're building engines the traditional way. Raptor is built differently. Every aerospace textbook will tell you that rocket engines use kerosene, hydrogen, or hydrazine derivatives. Methane is not in the standard curriculum. Raptor uses methane, and not because it is the best fuel for Earth-based launches. It is not. Liquid hydrogen has better specific impulse. Kerosene has better density. Methane is chosen because of Mars. The Sabatier reaction is the key. On Mars, you have an atmosphere that is 95% carbon dioxide. You have water ice just below the surface. React the CO2 with hydrogen from the water, and you get methane and oxygen. That means a starship on Mars can make its own propellant for the return journey. You do not have to carry the return fuel from Earth. You do not have to pre-position tanks on the Martian surface. But there is another advantage on Earth. Methane burns cleanly. It avoids soot buildup in the engine, which is critical for reusability. Traditional kerosene engines need to be overhauled after each flight because of the soot residue. Methane engines can fly again and again. And by using subcooled liquid oxygen with methane, propellant density rises by 8 to 12%, increasing pump efficiency. The textbooks do not cover this because the textbooks were written before in-situ resource utilization was a serious engineering consideration. They assume you bring your fuel with you. Raptor assumes you make it. Raptor can throttle from 100% to 20% of thrust. That sounds good, but it creates a problem. At 40% throttle, a Raptor 2 still produces about 92 tons of thrust. A starship that has burned most of its propellant weighs far less than that. The engine cannot throttle low enough to hover. This is the hover slam maneuver that every starship landing requires. You do not hover, you descend at a controlled rate, decelerating precisely, and you hit zero velocity at exactly the moment you touch the ground. The minimum throttle constraint comes from physical limits. You need enough mass flow through the engine walls to cool them. Drop below that limit and the engine melts. There is also nozzle flow separation. If the exhaust pressure drops too far below atmospheric pressure, the flow separates from the nozzle wall, causing instability that can destroy the engine. The textbooks do not cover this nuance because they treat throttling as a simple valve adjustment. In reality, throttling a rocket engine is a delicate balance of thermal management, flow stability, and structural integrity. Raptor has evolved through 3 generations. Raptor 4 is already in development. Raptor 1, 185 tons of thrust, 250 bar chamber pressure. Raptor 2, 230 tons of thrust, 300 bar chamber pressure, 347 seconds specific impulse. Raptor 3, 280 tons of thrust, 350 bar chamber pressure, 350 seconds specific impulse, 1,525 kilograms engine mass. Raptor 4 is targeting 330 tons of thrust and 400 bar chamber pressure. Elon Musk has stated that thrust will exceed 300 tons with Raptor 3.x, enabling 10,000 tons at liftoff. The vacuum version, with its giant nozzle, is projected to achieve a specific impulse of 380 seconds. Each generation pushes the boundary further. Each generation learns from the failures of the last. The textbooks will catch up. They always do. But by the time they do, Raptor will have moved on. In 2011, the team around that whiteboard in Hawthorne was told the full-flow staged combustion cycle was impossible. 50 years of textbooks said it was too complex, too many moving parts, too many things that could go wrong, but they did it anyway. They upgraded the Stennis E2 test stand. They built a subscale demonstrator. They proved the cycle worked. They printed cooling channels that could not be machined. They stripped away weight until the engine weighed less than many car engines. They chose methane not because it was the best fuel on Earth, but because it was available on Mars. And they learned to throttle an engine that could not hover. The textbooks describe